Okay, so for those of you who just joined and for those of you who couldn't hear me before, good morning. And we are going to be continuing in our series of Women in the Torah, following the beautiful theme that we began last week. So before we start, if anybody wants to share any moment that they had this past week that felt like a Chava moment, I'd love to hear from you if anybody has any experience that they'd like to share. You're welcome to unmute yourself. You have a button in the corner if you'd like.
I think we're all too shy.
Oh, okay. Well, you don't sound very shy. Do you have anything you'd like to share?
I am shy, but it's just difficult to share something with a moderator that we don't really know yet, and you know what I'm saying.
I completely understand. And thanks for sharing that. That in itself is brave enough. Thanks for sharing. Anybody have anything they'd like to share? All right. Well, we're going to move into the next generation of Jewish womanhood that we are going to be exploring today. And our story today takes us many generations later. In fact, as we learn in Pirkei Avot, which is the ethics of our fathers, which for anyone who follows the tradition of reading Pirkei Avot every Shabbat, there is a section of Pirkei Avot that talks about many different numbers. And one of the chapters in Pirkei Avot states that there were 10 generations from Adam until Noah, and there were 10 generations from Noah until Avraham. So from last week's class until this week's class is roughly 20 generations or so. And today we are zooming into the world of the first matriarch. Now, we know her as Sara Imenu. That was not her given name. In her lifetime, Sara Imenu had 3 names. And each of these names corresponds to a different stage in her life. And we are going to follow the story of Sara, see the evolution of her life, and we will learn from her experiences to bring it into our own lives as well. So let's begin by sharing her 3 names. And if anybody can think of a nickname that they had when they were a child, it brings back a memory of who called them by that name, or what stage in their life they were when they were called by that name, or maybe it was a pet name by a loved one. Names that are called evoke a certain meaning because they reflect a stage in a person's life. I know for myself, I never remembered this, but when I was looking at videos of when I was a baby, my family called me Chayala. Now I go by Mushka. My full name is Chaya Mushka. But when I hear the name Chayala being called, it's a baby name for me. I haven't been called that from when I was a young child. And I'm sure we can all think of names that we've had in our lives that evoke a certain emotion or remind us of a certain stage. Sara had 3 names, and each one was a representation of a different stage in her life. I'm sharing my screen with you here, so give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect, thank you. So there were 3 names that Sara was called her
You're
lifetime.
freezing up. You're freezing
She
up.
started off with the name Yiska. Sorry. She began with the name Yiska. Now, Yiska was the name that she was given at birth. Later in her life, where we actually meet her in the story of the Torah, she is called Sarai. And then the Torah tells us when her name evolves from Sarai to Sara. And we know her, and she is called historically, biblically, and the name that we give when we want to call for one of the matriarchs is Sara. Sara. So let's start with Yiska. What does the name Yiska actually mean? Where did it come from? So Yiska means vision, to see. And the reason that she was given this name by her parents is because she was incredibly beautiful. She was a vision to behold. Yiska was the most beautiful woman from a very young age. She was a gorgeous woman, and everybody wanted to see her. She was a vision to behold. In fact, she is considered one of the most beautiful women in history. Physically, she was gorgeous. Now, spiritually, the name also meant something that connected with her, because from a very young age, Yiska had spiritual vision. In fact, she was one of the 7 women who had prophecy. And she experienced prophecy from a young age, which tells us that she had true vision. And so this name Yiska comes from her being a vision of beauty and her spiritual vision. Where did she grow up? In the city of Ur Kastin. She lived in a very progressive environment. Now, progressive is relative, right? For that time period, her city where she grew up was extremely modern, advanced. In fact, archaeological remains that are dug up of the city where she lived in Ur Kastin give us a very interesting clue as to the higher level of education that was in this city, the progressive infrastructure that was found in the city. So she was living in a modern world for her time. And she was very popular. In fact, everyone wanted to marry her because she was beautiful. She was very educated and very intelligent. And from the fact that she had prophecy, we can see that she had a connection with what was normal at that time. In fact, she was living in the time of Avraham. And before she even married Avraham, before she got married, she was on her own spiritual journey. And she chose to marry Avraham and change her life drastically. She was living a life where pagan beliefs were the only beliefs that anybody had. Everybody was serving idols. And she chose Avraham. Who was Avraham? Well, Avraham was a preacher. He was a person who discovered God on his own. He defied everyone around him. In fact, his father was a chief idol worshiper and actually sold idols. And the story goes that when Avraham was a young boy, he was manning his father's shop, and his father sold idols. And he would constantly argue with his father because he did not believe in idol worship of the world. And he had a run-in with his father. What did he do? Well, he was managing the shop, and he went around and he smashed all the idols, and he left the biggest idol, the one that his father worshipped the most. He left that one standing, and he put the axe in the hand of the idol. And when his father came home, he was furious. All the merchandise has been shattered. He says, who broke all of the idols? And he said, oh, well, this idol got really upset and broke all the other idols. Cheeky little one, wasn't he? And his father says, that's impossible. The idol doesn't move. The idol can't go around and break anything. What, are you playing with me? And he says, 1 second. If you're telling me that this idol doesn't have the power to even break another idol, how do you think it has the power to give you everything in your life? Why are you worshiping an idol that can't even move? That can't even use an axe. And that was his way of convincing his father that he should believe in God. Except it didn't work. Instead, his father took him to the king, and they threw him into a fiery furnace because this boy was threatening their beliefs. And as we know, the Midrash, the stories in the Torah tell us that he was protected. And when they took him out of the fire, expecting him to be burnt, he was alive and well. And this was the first test that Avraham actually withstood, was being forced to, well, he didn't know that he was going to survive, was being forced to give up his own life, or so he thought, for his belief in God. And he went on to not just continue believing.
I had a question.
You're frozen again, Mushka. Mushka, you're frozen.
Are we frozen again? Oh, I think we're back. Do you hear me now? All right.
The lady that's next to you, 1786.
Give me just a moment, please.
She has a question.
Hello?
No, frozen.
Hello?
She's frozen again. She's
Okay.
gonna, whatever, try to fix the internet. You're muted, Mushka. You're muted. Now
I'm back. Sorry, give me just a moment. I am going to change devices as soon as I'm able to. I'm not sure why it's not letting me join from my other device, but do you hear me now?
yes. But you keep freezing and unfreezing. You're frozen again. No. Try. Okay, now we see movement.
Amy Jacobson, do you see something that says admit on the top of your page?
We can hear you now, so
You do.
you're
Perfect.
in.
I'm not sure what happened, but when I got disconnected, I was no longer the host. And it says that Amy Jacobson, do you see that it says on the top of your page, admit? Can you click it, please? My apologies, ladies.
No problem. I just have to find it now.
Sure,
Mm.
because it's not letting me get back on.
Oh, no, it says admit you. Okay,
Yeah,
admit. There
please.
you go.
And if
Perfect.
it's possible to make me the host again, that would be great.
Sure. Let's try to make you the host again. Make host. Perfect. Yes. Okay, you are now the host. You have become the host. You're the best host of all.
But now she's gone. Where is she?
It sounds like you're muted, Mushki.
Plus, I see two of her. But she's still muted. You have two devices that you're using, Mushka, and you have now, okay, wait a minute. Now you have one device, but you're muted. Now you're free.
All right, ladies, do you hear me now? Perfect. All right, we're back. My apologies. And I'm now on a different device, and I believe it will be a lot clearer. So if we have any other technical difficulties, my apologies. All right. So where were we? We were learning about Sara. And as we spoke about Avraham in the course of his...
I thought we were still Avraham in the Tanur.
Yes, exactly. So in the course of Abraham's life, he brought God into the rest of the world. And Sara was attracted to that. Sara was attracted to Abraham not because of his magnetic personality and his charisma or his, outgoing, incredibly popular style of dealing with things. Because the truth is that although Abraham was charismatic and magnetic and everything that we know him as, he was so foreign from the life that everybody else was leading that it almost seems like marrying Avraham was not the best choice. If you think about it, the most gorgeous woman who could have had any man she wanted, and she chose Avraham. Yes, she chose Avraham because they shared the same belief. They shared a common mission. And that was a mission that she was able to do with Avraham. In fact, when Avraham was told to leave his home, and Avraham and Sara left Haran, and they traveled to Eretz Canaan, they traveled to the lands of Canaan, not knowing where they were going, completely following God blindly. It says that they took along with them the souls that they had created. Now, normally when we talk about souls that people have created, it refers to children. But they didn't have any children. And our commentaries tell us that the souls that they created were actually the people that they had influenced to believe in God. And our commentaries tell us that Avraham was teaching the men and Sara was teaching the women. So they were a team. Sara was equally an educator, a leader, an inspiration to so many people. She was a very powerful woman. And she used her beauty and her education and her wisdom to influence people to believe in God. And so we see that when we are introduced to Sara, She is now called Sarai, because when she married Avraham, she shed the personality of Yitzchok. She didn't want to be a woman who was a vision of beauty, that everybody looked at her for her external value. She wanted to be valued for her internal value, for her wisdom, for her connection with God, for her dedication to her mission, for her partnership with her husband. That's what she wanted to be known for. And she was called Sarai. In fact, Avraham called her this name, which means Sarai, my princess. Sarai means my princess. And that's what she was. She was a princess. She was a woman who fulfilled her duty as the princess that she chose to be. Now, I want to share with you a story that happened with Sara. Many of you know this. The story that happened when Avraham and Sara traveled to Egypt. Now, in the Torah, we always refer to this woman, Sara, by her name, as every woman should be called by her name. And the story tells us that they were traveling to Egypt. This was one of the tests that Avraham and Sara were given, a test by God, that when they came to the land of Canaan, which was a test in itself, uprooting themselves from their home and moving to a foreign land. And when they got to this land, boom, another challenge. What's the challenge? There's no food, there's a famine. And they had to journey now to the land of Egypt. And as they're traveling to the land of Egypt, they get to the border of Egypt. And Avraham looks at his wife and says, hey, we have a problem. Now, I'm certainly not quoting this verbatim, but he says, we have a problem. What's the problem? You are stunningly beautiful. Doesn't sound like a problem, does it? Well, it was a problem, because Egypt was known for extreme levels of immorality and immodesty. And Avraham knew that the moment he comes into the land of Egypt with his beautiful wife, she would be kidnapped. She would be taken, because that's what Egyptian men did. They took beautiful women. And they come up with a plan. What's the plan? Well, we'll put her in a box. We'll try to hide her. But just in case she will be found, because, border control there, they check the luggage. Why don't we say that we're siblings? I'll tell them that you're my sister. Why would we do that? Well, this was his thought process. Avraham's thinking, there's a beautiful woman. The Egyptians will want to take this woman, but it's beneath them to take a married woman. They can't take a married woman. If there's a husband involved, we can't take her. So Egyptian mindset will just kill the husband, and now she's not married anymore. It's a great idea, right? Well, if you're an Egyptian, it's a wonderful idea. So what does Avraham have as a solution? Let's say that we're siblings, so at least they won't kill me. Now, don't you think that Avraham would be more worried about his wife being taken than about his own life? Well, what's interesting is that Avraham was not worried so much about his wife, because he knew that she would be okay. He knew that, first of all, she would never stoop to the level of immorality that was pervasive in Egyptian culture. He trusted her completely. He trusted her. He trusted their relationship. And more importantly, he trusted her level of piety and level of spiritual connection to God. And he knew that God would protect her. He knew that God would not let anything happen to her, because she was so holy. He, on the other hand, needed to come up with a plan to take care of himself. Which tells us that if we can imagine how holy Avraham was, Sara was infinitely greater. And that's what happens. They come to the border of Egypt. And all of a sudden, Sarai is now called Ha'isha, the woman. The Torah refers to her when they enter Egypt as Ha'isha, the woman, no longer by her name, because she was entering a place where she didn't matter what her name was. She had no intrinsic value for her own self. All she was a woman, a female, beautiful body. That's what the Egyptians looked at her as. And it's interesting because it seems like this is the first time that Avraham's noticing how beautiful she is. Really? They've been married for so long. He just now realized that she is gorgeous? Of course he knew how beautiful she was. They lived together. He knew how beautiful she was. But he never valued her for her external beauty. That wasn't what attracted him to her. What attracted him to her was her inner beauty, her inner value. And so it was only when they were coming to a place where she would be taken because of her external beauty that he focuses on this external beauty. Because until then, it didn't really matter as much. Of course, it's beautiful and it must have brought them closer together and whatever it was in their own personal relationship, but that wasn't what made her truly beautiful. Her external value was only secondary in comparison to her internal value, her internal beauty. And in fact, when they came to Egypt, she was found. They said that she is his sister. She was taken to King Pharaoh, and not for 1 minute was she enticed by the charms of this king who was trying to seduce her. And it was only after Pharaoh was inflicted with plagues and diseases that he realized maybe I shouldn't be taking this woman. And he went back to Avraham and said, well, who is she really? And that's when Pharaoh released her and they went back on their way. But this story tells us that what her true value in the eyes of Avraham and in the eyes of God and the eyes of the Torah is her inner value. Which brings us to the next beautiful anecdote that I'd like to share.
Could I
Sara.
ask a question about that
Yes.
anecdote?
Yes, please ask a
Why
question.
didn't Sara just wear a burqa?
Oh,
and
what a
hide
good
her beauty?
First of all, to put it bluntly, Egyptian men would have had no problem just taking off the burqa and everything else. But she was hidden originally. They hid her in a box. They did try to do their best to hide her, but no amount of clothing could hide her physical beauty. So now we get to our next situation in Sarah's life that is recounted in the Torah.
Wait, I had a question.
Yes, sure.
Oh, okay. No, I appreciate what you said and that I've known that, but I also had learned that I mean, Sarah was related to Abraham, as they all
Yeah.
were. So
Yes,
I've heard
she
different things that she was, in some ways, that she was his sister, that they shared the same father, and other things that it was that she was his niece.
So there are differences of opinion, but the most prevalent opinion in the the general family trees that are found and recorded by our sages is that she was his niece. So her father was actually Abraham's brother.
Right. So she and Lot are sister and brother.
Exactly. And in fact, when we learn about the story of Lot, which we're not going to get to much today, but it's definitely a story very fascinating, worth looking into. This was an extremely difficult challenge for her when Avraham had to send Lot away because they were siblings. And we know that Lot in the Torah is called Abraham's nephew.
Right.
So, yes. So they definitely weren't far off from the truth in saying that they were related, but in the context of this story, it certainly was meant as a protection. They were not siblings at that moment. They were husband and wife. So now we get to a story several years later when Avraham has a brit milah. He circumcises himself and he receives 3 visitors. In fact, Avraham and Sara were known specifically for their hospitality. They had a tent that was open with 4 doors in the middle of the desert, and all the travelers and passersby would stop off and they would be fed and clothed if needed and washed, and they would enjoy the beautiful hospitality that Avraham and Sarah would provide for them. And that was one of the ways actually that they were brought closer to God, because at the end of the meal, Avraham would say that they should bless God. And in that way, he brought many people closer to God. And it was 3 days after Avraham's circumcision. And he was in incredible pain. And God made the sun shine very, very strongly so there would be no travelers, so that Avraham wouldn't have to take care of any guests because he was in a lot of pain. And Avraham was sitting outside his tent, and 3 men approached. These were angels that God sent to visit Avraham. And angels are not like women. They do not multitask. In fact, an angel can only do one specific mission at a time. So there were 3 angels because there were 3 missions that had to be accomplished. One was to heal Avraham. The other one was to lead the destruction of Sodom. And the third was to give Sara the news that she would have a child. Now, Sara was almost 90 years old. This was something that Sara and Avraham had longed for and had prayed for years and years and years. This was a challenge. The challenge of infertility was one that Sara endured and that pained her tremendously. In fact, Sara wanted that Avraham should have a child, and it didn't seem possible that she would have a child of her own. She was at a very advanced age. And in fact, when they left Egypt, Pharaoh gave Avraham and Sara a gift. His daughter became Sarah's handmaid. And she actually wanted Avraham to marry this woman and have a child with her so that Avraham should have a child through her. And this woman was Hagar, and the child that was born was Yishmael. So we can imagine how challenging it was that Sara did not have a child, but her husband had a child with her maid. And Yishmael was the only progeny of Avraham at that point. And there was an angel that was now coming to give Sara the news that she would have a child. And I'm going to apologize now because I switched devices, so I cannot share my screen from here to show you the text inside. But if anybody wants the pasuk, I will be happy to share the source with you. In the book of Genesis, we see that the Torah tells us 3 angels came, and one of the angels asked Avraham, "Where is your wife?" And Avraham responded that she is in the tent. She's inside. She's indoors. She doesn't stay outside. She's inside. And the story continues that the angel gave her the news. And can anybody tell me what was her reaction when she heard that she would have a child at this age?
She laughed.
She laughed. Hold the laughter thoughts for a moment. We'll get back to it. What Avraham says about Sarah, that she is in the tent, is often used, that quote is often used to describe the idea of modesty. And in fact, many people have a myth. They have this misunderstood idea that the epitome of a Jewish woman is to be in the home exclusively. Sarah, where was she? She was at home. Every Jewish woman should try to be like Sarah. So what is the epitome of a Jewish woman's mission? To be at home. And ladies, let me tell you that there is nothing further from the truth. And in fact, I want to bring a different verse, this time from Psalms, from Tehillim, which states that Kol Kevuda Bat Melech Penima. This is a phrase that is written by King David in Psalms and Tehillim, where it says that all of the glory of the daughter of a king, which means a princess, a Jewish woman, is, the Hebrew word is penima. Penima literally means within. Now, there are many ways to translate the word penima with very subtle differences. It could mean inside, it could be inner, it could be within. They all sound the same, but they have very different nuances and connotations. What is the idea of Sarai, who then at that time became Sara, leading her into the third phase of her life, the evolution of being Avraham's princess to God's princess? What does it mean to be a princess? Well, King David tells us that the beauty and the glory of a princess is within. Avraham said that she was inside the tent. But we know that Sarah was not a stay-at-home chef, just a home cook, a homemaker, and all she did was stay home. We know that that wasn't the case because she was a teacher. She was a lecturer. She was an inspiration. She was guiding women to the path of God. And yet, where can she be found? Whenever the Torah talks about her location, it says that she was in the tent. And now we see King David saying that the glory of a Jewish woman is within, is to be inside. So what does that mean? What is the standard of modesty that we learn from Sara? So there's a very big difference between inside and within. And I want to take a moment to discuss this difference. Sarah's power and strength and beauty was not because she was in her home. It was because she didn't need to be anywhere else other than in her home in order to be strong and powerful. A Jewish woman should be in whatever position she feels helps her achieve her biggest potential. But we shouldn't think for one moment that our power, our strength, and more importantly, our value comes from any external position that we hold. It comes from within. The glory of a woman, of the daughter of a king, is within. That doesn't mean we have to keep it hidden inside of us. It means that it comes from inside of us and it radiates outward, but it is not dependent on anything external. Think of the value of silver. Different years, silver has a different value. The silver candlesticks that I got when I got married, it's a religious custom in religious circles that the bride gets a set of silver candlesticks for her wedding. Well, let me tell you, the price of silver candlesticks today is very different than the price it was when I got married. The price of silver is constantly fluctuating, which tells you that depending on the year, your silver piece has different value because its value is dependent on external circumstances. Actually, the same is with a woman in modern day society. The value of a woman is constantly changing. What's considered appropriate for women is constantly evolving, because the world that we live in, society, is extremely transient. What's considered appropriate for a woman to wear is constantly changing. What is considered appropriate or necessary for a woman to do is constantly changing, depending on the era. What is considered normal for a woman to do today is very different than it was 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, certainly thousands of years ago. So if our value as women is dependent on external circumstances and depending on the decade we are living in, then does that mean we don't have any of our own value? That's shocking. And that's tragic. Because the value of a woman is not dependent on external values. It is dependent on what is within. The core value of Jewish womanhood, which is based on the legacy that we have from our matriarchs. The legacy of the 3 miracles that happened in Sarah's tent. When she married, and this we're going to discuss further when we get to our topic on Rivka, there were 3 miracles that were ever present in Sarah's tent. The miracle that her candles, her Shabbat candles, remained lit all through the week. There was always a blessing in her challah dough. In her bread was always fresh. And there was a cloud of glory that hovered above her tent, which for those of you who were on our last class, these 3 miracles are connected with the 3 mitzvot of women that we discussed last week. The mitzvah of lighting Shabbat candles, the mitzvah of taking challah and keeping kosher, and the mitzvah of mikvah, family purity. And we see that this was the core of Sarah's existence. Of course, she was not always at home. She didn't always have to be at home in the background, in the shadows, like unfortunately some people think that women should be. Wasn't. The idea is that her value was not dependent on anything she did outwardly. Our value as Jewish women is what is in our soul, and that doesn't change with the current trends. What is valued for a woman doesn't depend on the women's lib, on the feminist movement, on women's empowerment. That doesn't define our strength. We can have as many jobs as we want outside our homes, but that is not what defines us as women. What defines us as women is the standard of our soul. And this is what we learn from Sara. She was Sara, the princess of God. She shed the persona of Yitzchok. She didn't want to be seen for her external beauty. And she became Avraham's princess, a partner in his work. And then she evolved to be the princess of God, a woman whose standards are dictated by what God expects of her, not by what society expects of her, not by what her group of friends expect of her, but by what God expects of her, what the inner voice in her soul expects her to be, expects her to do. And that is something that never, ever changes. That is something that remains constant. In fact, that is something that should set the example of what every other woman should want to be. Every woman who wants to feel empowered and strong and beautiful and proud should remember that our value comes from within us. It is not measured on external values, because those are always shifting. So if you are here because this is here and this is external value, well, then if external value is here, you are less than. And if external value is here, well, then all of a sudden you're better than. But that makes no sense, because that means you always have to be changing. And of course, we always want to evolve and we always want to grow, and we should always be growing. But our growth should never be dictated by external standards, because then our growth is never sustainable, because external values are always changing. Our growth, we learned from Sara, should come from within, should come from the tent of holiness and godliness that we create for ourselves, and that the Torah sets up for each one of us. This was Sara. Sara was the woman who made her standard of value system, made her standard of beauty, not by being a vision, not by what other people look at her and see, but by what was within her. And ladies, we all have those moments where we have to look deep within ourselves and see, what is my value? Well, let me tell you, our value as Jewish women is defined by our soul. And our soul is a piece of God. And that is the greatest value of all. Sara gave us that legacy. She gave us that gift. And let's remember that Sara is our matriarch. And the fact that she is our matriarch means that she gave it to us in our DNA. A matriarch is a mother. And there are things that mothers pass down to their children that are just a part of them, whether you like it or not, right? Think of something that you inherited from your mother. You didn't choose. You just have it because it's part of your DNA. I'll give you a personal example. My mother has a beautiful voice. She sings beautifully. And I was blessed with that same gift that my mother gave me. Well, let me tell you something. If I would never, ever sing, it would still be part of my DNA, but it would be such a waste. It would be such a waste to not use that gift that was given to me. And Sara's standard of modesty and her inner value is something that she has given each one of us. And it's our choice to tap into it and use it. It's our choice to say, well, it's in my DNA, I'm going to use it. Or we could say, well, I don't want to do that. That's fine, it's up to you. But remember, we have it within us. It's inside of us, which means that we have the power to tap into that inner strength, that inner modesty, that inner beauty, and set our standards on the standard of our soul. And I want to end off with a point that I said we're going to get back to, which is the idea that Sara laughed. When Sara heard the news that she would have a child, her response was laughter. Now, laughter is a form of joy that is very, very authentic. It's easy to fake a smile. It's a lot harder to fake a laugh. Laughter is genuine joy. Now, we always think of laughter as synonymous with a child. A child laughs, the laughter of a child. Why do we think of the laughter of a child? Because a child has authentic joy, real joy. And when Sara heard the news that she would have a child, she laughed. And that was authentic. Now, this tells us that she was used to laughing. The fact that she laughed when she heard the news tells us that laughter was a part of her life constantly. which gives us insight into how Sara handled challenges. She handled challenges with joy. When she encountered difficulties, laughter, joy was her go-to response. And we see that even in the name of her son. Her son was named Yitzchok. Now it's interesting because it seems like God wasn't too happy with her laughter. It seemed like she was almost mocking this news. Like she was so like, that's crazy. You know, how could she have a child? She's 90 years old. There's no way she's going to have a child. It seemed like she was laughing like as if she was scoffing the idea. But we know that that isn't the case, because if her laughter was negative, then her child would not have been named Yitzchak, which means laughter. The fact that her child was given this name tells us that he was conceived through laughter. He was born from a woman who really embodied joy, who embodied laughter. And Sarah's life was not easy. Just from the few stories that I shared with you today, we see that she encountered tremendous challenges. She left her home. She left her lifestyle. She married Avraham. She was forced to uproot herself and move to a new home. She was kidnapped by a king. And by the way, we didn't even have time today because, you know, in order to discuss the whole story of Sarah, we could do a whole series just on Sarah. She was kidnapped more than once. She was also kidnapped by another king at a later date with a very similar story to the one of Pharaoh. She was kidnapped by kings. She didn't have children. Her maid had a child while she was barren. And later on in the story, we know that she actually had to send Ishmael away from home because he was a negative influence on her child when she finally had a son. And then, the end of her life, she passed away from the shock of hearing that her son was almost sacrificed when God commanded Avraham to sacrifice his son, their son Yitzchok. And at the last moment, of course, God pulled him back and did not tell him to kill at the last moment his son. But Sarah actually died from the news of this story. So her life was fraught with challenges from the beginning to the end. And yet the legacy that she leaves, is her son Yitzchak. The name means laughter because she handled her challenges with joy. She laughed, she danced, she was happy. I remember several years ago, there was a very difficult circumstance in my family. A close family member of mine was going through a very difficult medical challenge, and it was very hard on the whole family. And there were many times where we didn't know where the situation would go. And I would call my mother for updates. You know, what's happening? How are they doing? What's going on? And my mother always had this mantra. Her thing, did you dance? Did you dance today? I said, Ma, did you dance today? And when the going got rough, we danced. And when we heard very difficult news in my family, we danced. And then when, thank God, we heard the good news of her complete recovery, and thank God she is now well and healthy, believe me, we danced with joy. And sometimes we were crying while we danced, but we were always joyous because at the end of the day, we knew the mantra that Hasidic philosophy teaches us, which is Simcha Poretz Geder. Joy has the ability to break through any boundary. Sarah understood that. She lived with joy. And her child, the legacy that she leaves us with, Yitzchak, the next generation, is one of laughter. It's one of joy. And this tells us that our beauty as women and the strength that we have as women, we should take on this challenge, take on this persona with joy. We should be happy with our role as Jewish women because there is so much beauty and there's so much richness in the role of a Jewish woman. And we can take our inner standards of beauty and radiate it outward in whatever position we have, whatever position we hold in our lives or we've held in our lives. We are valued by our soul. And that doesn't matter whether we have a career or no career, our age, our stage, our families, doesn't matter. Our value is pinima, within. It is the standard of our soul. So I'm leaving you with this message this week. And I look forward to seeing you, God willing, to continue this discussion as we move on to the story of Rivka. So have a wonderful day, ladies.
Thank you.
Sharing with you all.
Everybody. Thank you
I
very much.
apologize for the technical difficulties. And God willing, next class, we will have a better system set up. I was wondering why the service was down and now it's pouring rain. I understand service is always terrible when it's raining. So I'm glad we were able to make it through. Have a wonderful rest of your day and enjoy a week where you can always be like Sara.
Thank you.
Thank you. Beautiful class. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too, ladies. Goodbye.